it is.
Couple more minutes. Oh.
I think we're going to get started. Hello? If you could take your seats, please. Good morning, everyone. For those of you I have not had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Denise Rossander. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Information Officer for the BC Natural Resource Ministries. It's my pleasure to introduce this next session and the presenter. For those in the room, you should be aware there's also a live feed happening in the Carson room. And for those in the Carson room, welcome. Can't see you, but welcome. Mike Cardy is the Chief Technology Strategist, for Red Hat Canada, where he helps his clients navigate and realize the expected outcomes of investments in supported, open source-based software technology. Mike has extensive experience in designing and building hybrid cloud and digital marketing strategies. Recently, his focus has been on helping clients prepare, develop, and align technology and resources for digital government. I know I'm very excited to hear what he has to say, so please welcome Mike Cardy to the stage.
Great. Good morning. How is everybody? Good? How's the conference been so far? Good, good. You're a lively bunch. First of all, I'd like to thank the OCIO. This is my inaugural presentation and actually attendance to the event, so thank you very much to CJ and the team at OCIO for this opportunity. I have to confess that I haven't heard Alex Benet talk about death so much in my life, and his central theme to his talk, I can guarantee you today I'll be talking about living things as opposed to death. Thank you for the introduction. I recognize it. So I am Michael Cardy. I'm Chief Strategist for Canada at Red Hat. I spend most of my time in the public sector. I cover all jurisdictions across Canada, provinces. I spent a lot of time at the feds. I was on the Open Source Advisory Board under Mark Berard and Alex Benet when he was there, trying to help transform the government of Canada and look at open source as a way to do that. And there's actually white papers and some practices that are now on GitHub that you can download and see what's been happening at the government of Canada. I also spent a lot of time with the province of Ontario and their transformation activities. So my thesis or theme, I guess, today is not death. Basically what I'm telling you, and hopefully I can show you through stories, I will confess, I was just saying that my background, I'm actually a physicist, a high energy physicist, and so I always have a natural curiosity to understand why things are the way they are. And so you'll see sprinklings of research papers that I've done just to satisfy my own curiosity and why things work and how we can achieve these accelerated velocities. But the main message is there is a better way to innovate. And it's been proven over and over and over again through all the private sector customers I see, as well as the public sector. So I'll sprinkle in some patterns and anti-patterns, things not to do that I've seen go sideways with other organizations. But I will tell you, this better way of doing things is actually happening right now within the province of BC, and I'm very proud to be able to stand up and talk to other government and public servants to say what is going on, particularly in the BC Dev Exchange. So I'm very proud of what's been happening here. So today's talk is based upon my experience personally and my organization in Canada, and I'm a member of the Chief Council for Red Hat around the world, and these are actually things that, you know, I'm just not talking about from an academic perspective. These are actual rulings and understandings and principles that have come as a result of actually meeting with customers and talking about their journeys. So I will start out, there is a massive, massive opportunity in front of us. I know the BC Dev Exchange is an example. takes about 6 minutes to provision all the required environments and infrastructure and all the new modern tooling used to actually build applications in an agile DevOps fashion right within BC here. And I worked out the math, if you will, when I compared against the old way of doing that, and that's about a 44,000 time improvement. It was around 6 months down to 6 minutes. You work out the mathematics, that's what it ends up looking like. So not only in terms of provisioning and putting infrastructure in place, but one of the banks, they went from a virtual farm down to a container-based platform, and they went from 50 virtual servers down to 3, and this is the opportunity just from a pure infrastructure play to remove expense from the organization. One of the big banks removed 104 years or 38,000 hours of developers waiting for the required prerequisite infrastructure to start to build applications, and this was after 2 years of the investment. One of the customers, this is TELUS Digital, do 550 deploys per day to production, constantly iterating and effectively experimenting with the market to understand, depending on demographic or who you are as an individual, how they should position their solutions to them. And to look at a grand scale, I know Amazon might be here in the room today, but Amazon, as of 2016, they're doing around 10 million deploys per day to production. And so we're going from this, flipping from thinking, how long is it going to take to add value to the organization by pushing something into production, to how many deploys per day or deploys per hour can we do? And I guess if you weren't, you're probably aware, but Red Hat was acquired July 19th when I was on a ship in Greece. This summer, IBM proposed to buy us for $34 billion, and we've been very purposeful in keeping the organization separate but working together on that. So Red Hat is a complete open source organization. Everything we do is open source. We do a lot of the contributions in the open source world so that when you consume it as the enterprise, it's predictable, it's protected, and it's appropriate for your consumption. And just quickly around IBM, we see a great partnership between our two organizations. They bring great industry, deep expertise and value. They bring scale to us, and they're building and investing in their services. But Red Hat is still Red Hat. We have a very defined synergy team that regulates how we work together with IBM moving forward. So not much has really changed, actually, after the acquisition. From my perspective, we're still doing business with our customers, same offices, same systems, same people, same org structure, et cetera. But we're so excited to have IBM as our owners. So this picture is to represent organizations in the journey. If you were to look at this car going down the road, as organizations try to increase and accelerate their innovation, they come up against this first curve, and the first thing they typically do if they're in technology, and how many people here are within technology within the room? How many people are non-technologists in the room? Okay, and who are govies? I learned that term from Ruman actually yesterday. Okay, good. Now how many private sector? Okay, great. So the first thing technologists think about when they want to move faster is they think about technology. And quite frankly, this is the easy part of how to do this, accelerating innovation. The next big curve they come up against in terms of slowing down the velocity of innovation is process. Process can hold you back. I know within government services, policy and other types of things, processes can really hold you back. But the real hairpin curve that really slows you down is people and culture, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that today. It's funny, I'm a technologist at heart, but I find I spend more time talking about psychology than technology nowadays as a result of this huge change that's happening. As a strategist, I'm a planner, I think like a planner, and our CEO, Jim Whitehurst, got up in front of Summit about 4 years ago, which is our big client conference, and he got up and he said, planning is dead as we know it. Organizations don't necessarily plan, do a 3-year, 5-year vision, build a plan, and execute against that plan to either provide services to the constituency or generate profits for the organization. Instead, nowadays, we've basically taken the approach, or maybe we've admitted that, we can build a plan, but there's so many assumptions in that plan, it's really hard to validate that that's actually going to have the impact we expect at the end of the day. And so instead, organizations are investing in two main areas: an agile organization, which I'll spend time on today, and the introduction of what I would call the platform. A singular platform. It may be distributed across the hybrid cloud environment, but this is a highly automated API-based platform. It is built on very fast pipelines. It's the new assembly line of how we generate value within the organization. And so instead of writing big, thick books that I see, business process, I saw some presentations talking about that yesterday. We're more about, let's have an understanding of what the vision is, and we'll iterate through and figure out and validate all those requirements, those assumptions that we're making, and show the actual consumers of that service as you go along to validate that and to provide information on how we need to move forward. We sort of have a vision, but we admit to ourselves that there is uncertainty. We don't necessarily know exactly where we're going, and we also admit that we may need to pivot and change all the time. I'm actually engaged in a project to help understand the value framework, value for how we build out some of the solutions within the BC Dev Exchange. And I did a little bit of research. This is a paper that was from 2017. For my understanding, and we can debate this after, but this is the first time I've seen an actual framework that will cover across how we measure value across public service, no matter what that service is being provided. So how do we measure standard value across the ministries, based on the Westminster model that we have of government within Canada and the Commonwealth. And so there's these four main categories, and this is just something to think about. The paper's there, it's downloadable. And in fact, in 1995, a fellow named Moore out of MIT said, look, he postulated that there is a thing such as public value that's synonymous with private value in the private sector. What does that mean? And he basically went through that arguments, and this is a follow-on based on research that was put in place. So as we think about generating value for the organization, that's a great way to characterize it. So if I were to focus on generating value from the government entity, if I focus on the technology value stream that I have here, this is the typical, if you look at the assembly line of IT, and I'm borrowing lean manufacturing terminology. Value stream is what's used and came out of the 70s and 80s out of the automotive market. Technology value stream is the application of lean manufacturing principles to the IT domain. And most organizations, from just looking at the value stream, they reorg to DevOps. They handle the people part of the problem domain. This is the biggest part of the problem domain to accelerate velocity. You have to build self-deploying, self-serve infrastructure to get the speed that you require. Automation, you have to be automation experts before you even think about accelerating the velocity. Everything should be automated. I take a very firm position that no one other than, I guess, coders should be configuring IT assets on a command line. That should all be written in recipes. In our terms, we call them playbooks, so that you can automate that. The next thing is continuous delivery, always having software that's functional and tested, and you can show to whoever's consuming it and get feedback from them. Advanced deployment techniques. 15 years ago when I ran a digital media business and I had data centers around the world, if I let a developer push something they asked to push something to production, there'd be no way. But nowadays, with advanced deployment techniques, you can safeguard, but you can effectively test your new versions of software and features actually in production without impacting the service that you're providing. And advanced deployment techniques, some of you may know, are canary testing, A/B testing, things like that. And then finally, I'm hinting at the fact that we need to rethink about application architecture. We're looking at distributed application architecture that is built for change, loosely coupled services together that form an application so that we can get that velocity. I will also take a very hard position that when you're going through this transformation, you have to transform the people, process, and technology at the same time. You have to make sure that the tooling and the technology is congruent with the people and the process, and you need to do that. You need to separate that team into a separate area and let them innovate the new way. Another sort of look at, from a timeline perspective, of what the transformation journey looks like. The middle part of the slide is talking around building new platforms that support that speed, adopting new skills and practices and tools, looking at transforming workloads, new distributed application architectures, and how do you scale and operate this? And this is where the platform will come in from an automated perspective. And this is typically a 12 to 18-month journey. Most of our organizations, including the BC Dev Exchange, it was about 6 months before we started having production workloads within the facility. And so, so we need to deliver. Most organizations say we need to deliver faster. And so they look at public cloud. They could be looking at modernizing their applications, And they realize that we need to accelerate the development process, like I talked about before, so they look at agile and DevOps processes. They realize they need to integrate with the existing systems. One of the guys at Red Hat says, nothing happens until you integrate. So how do you integrate and have two speeds happening within your organization so you can have data that's typically shared in other legacy systems? So integration becomes a very important thing. The next stage of the journey I've seen is microservices. We need to build applications that are architected for change. They need to be loosely coupled so you can have multiple teams working on different services within that architecture, moving at different speeds. And eventually, most organizations come up with this thing called containers. How many people know about containers? How many people are using containers today? Okay, so you guys are at this stage in the journey, apparently. I don't mean containers that are on chips and things like that. I mean actual containers where you embed the application itself and all its dependencies inside the container to allow you to predictably move it wherever you like and get that speed, whether it's through the technology value stream I just talked about, or whether you're moving it between public clouds or through the hybrid cloud. How do we do that? Well, we bundle all the dependencies of the application inside this immutable thing called a container. And containers are very lightweight, they're very small, and that's why we saw the 50-to-3 ratio of a virtual server environment versus the new container environment. Very, very efficient. And then they realize, most organizations start to develop applications. They may start in Docker. Hopefully, eventually, they get to an open container format, OCI, which we're a member of driving. And they they need an orchestration engine. You thought VMs had sprawl? Wait till you get containers. So containerization. So we've got distributed applications with each application is comprised or decomposed into services, and each one of those services is in the container. Okay, so this container is aligned, if you will, from an architectural perspective. And eventually, organizations such as the BC Dev Exchange here come up with what I would call a container as a service and a platform as a service. Right, so we need to automate and provide the developers those tools, those platforms, those bits and pieces of code to actually build out their applications in an automated technology value stream. And our product there is OpenShift. OpenShift runs in the BC Dev Exchange and has so for about 3 years now. So, as I said before, very, very proud of the BC Dev Exchange. It is, you know, all the stories I hear and all the things that are happening within this environment as a way, as a platform to transform how effectively, fundamentally, how you innovate within the BC government. Yeah, I think of this like, you know, driving a car, the waterfall approach to how we innovate versus this jet, this Raptor that you see up here. It is effectively, you can be orders of magnitude faster. And this has been proven, I guess, over 100 times. I understand there's 100 production applications within the BC Dev Exchange. And sometimes orders of magnitude in cost. And they've handled things such that you had trouble deploying an actual business application. They actually took those requirements and built it out in literally 3 to 4 months. So there's all kinds of use cases I've seen come out of this. And they've really streamlined team procurement, going to the street to figure out what do you need for development assets, putting together agile teams, and helping you within the ministries actually deploy and deliver value to the constituency. Rapid prototyping. I've seen examples where it's only, you know, a few weeks where you've actually prototyped something so that you can show and provide feedback on the actual format of the application and the features it's deploying, and using that as a feedback loop, which is an essential part of DevOps. Agile collaborative teams and application decomposition. The other pattern I've seen in the market is breaking down the big monolithic applications, and I know there's lots of monoliths within the BC, and I don't mean 2001, the Space Odyssey movie. I mean big applications that have all the features embedded in, and they're really hard-coded, they're tightly coupled, and it's hard to make change. It's hard to predict the outcome of change in those types of application architectures. So quickly, on the people side of things, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's quite true. I've seen this many times. My old organization, I had really advanced thinkers. I started doing Agile in 2006, and I still had the operations team that were thinking waterfall. And if you don't address the culture right away, it can become an issue. Interesting piece of research, an American sociologist called Robert Westroom. He's actually quoted many times in Why DevOps Actually Works. And he says, culture is defined as the organization's pattern of response to problems, opportunities, and encounters. And he studied many types of organizations. Ultimately here, he was studying, I guess, the ultimate impact of how well an organization works. This was ER rooms. I guess life or death is a pretty impactful thing. Although now I'm back to Alex's death theme again. So Robert studied NASA, he studied public sector organizations, and this is how he defined culture in order to be able to classify what kind of culture you have. And what came out of that were two main things. And this is the fundamental thing when you think about how you build systems, how you build organization. It was the flow of information. I mean from you to you. Is it the right information? Is it right? Is it timely? And is it relevant? And if you construct your organization, your culture, and your systems according to that, and your processes, you will end up with a high-performance organization, and a lot of that's around culture. The other thing is conscious inquiry. So he says the leaders, the preoccupations of the leaders will define the culture by the organization that they lead. And so they're looking for organizations to work in the open. As you can probably see where I'm going with this. We need to be conscious and question how we do things. A term I use is legacy blindness. You know, if you've been doing things, and I'm in an IT business almost 30 years now, you develop this legacy blindness, which means you've been doing the things the same way all for 20, 30 years, and you don't realize there's maybe a different way of doing that. And so I'm hoping you guys will open up your minds today. And so the flow of information, actually, Robert uses to categorize organizations. And you don't want to be in scenario A. You do not want to be in scenario B. Although scenario B is where most government organizations are, very bureaucratic, and quite frankly, we're kind of, because of the Westminster model, we're kind of structured that way. But you want to get to a generative culture, an organization that is focused on the mission. They question everything, they validate everything, and they take the scientific method to how they work and how they build things. And so in scenario C, you will get a generative culture emerge out of organizations that will do whatever it takes to get the information to the right person at the right time. Within Red Hat, we are open source. We run our company like open source. And these are the 5 principles we use, not only for open source, but how we make decisions. And it's a decision framework that I've shared with the Government of Canada. Happy to share it with you as well. But this is the way you need to start thinking. How do we work in the open? It's the old wisdom of the crowd story. I guess back in the 1850s, there was a fair in England, and there was a contest to measure the weight of a cattle beast. I'm a farmer, so I use the word cattle beast. I'll give you a little tip. If you're from the urban areas and you say cow, a country person can identify you right away. So what was the weight of this cattle beast? And there was a prize. And so what they found was a mathematician looked at it, and there was wild guesses all over the place. But when he took the average of all those guesses, it was within 1.5% of the actual weight of the cattle beast. And that's the wisdom of the crowd. So what's that mean? Diversity, inclusivity. The more people that speak up and participate, the better the outcome. In open source culture, open source is more than just code. We think of code and open source code and GitHub and all that stuff, but it's really about culture. It's about self-organizing organizations that govern themselves and they build to what the actual end users want. And there's 40 million people in GitHub, contributors to open source. That's a huge capacity. And one of the reasons the Dev Exchange was formed, because why don't we tap into those 40 million people who are in their spare time passionately deploying and building applications. In our organizations like that too at Red Hat, we're a bottom-up organization. When Jim joined us as the CEO from Delta Airlines, he walked into his usual 30, 60-day, 90-day assessment of the organization. He came up with a plan, and he walked into his lieutenants and said, "This is the plan moving forward." And they all looked at him and said, "No, we're not doing that. It's not for this reason, for this reason, this reason." We are a very bottoms-up organization. When we talk about strategy, it's the frontline guys in the open source community that are driving a lot of strategy for the products that you're consuming from us. And so the idea of the leader within an open source, open organization, and this is the book that I would highly recommend that you read, and there's a follow-on book that Jim just released. It's about creating passion for the frontline workers, empowering them to understand the mission and the objectives and the goals of generating value and aligning to that. And so we fundamentally believe that avoiding long-term roadmaps, get away from that. Start prototyping, less presentations, more prototyping, as we say sometimes. Break down big things into chunks. That's another theme of the presentation today, whether we're talking people, tech, or process. Rapid feedback cycles, I mean rapid feedback cycles, all the time building and iterating through that. And learning as you go. Policy, I think, from what I heard yesterday from one of the talks, we've got to think about policy in an ongoing iterative fashion. Sure, we have to go to legislation sometimes, and that may slow things down, but we've got to keep thinking and questioning what does policy mean within the government of BC. Automation, building new skills, and experimentation. How do we experiment and validate some of the assumptions we've been making? From a process perspective, the DevOps handbook you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, I think is the de facto standard for defining what DevOps is. I would highly recommend you, if you're thinking about DevOps, to read it. It outlines 3 principles. These 3 main principles you see in front of you, which are numbered 111. I guess that was a mistake. This book is written by Gene Kim, who's one of the forefathers. He wrote the Phoenix Project. People have read the Phoenix Project? Know the Phoenix Project? Definitely read that. Patrick Dubois, who actually coined the term DevOps. And by the way, DevOps, the term, and really the movement started in Toronto in 2009 at the Velocity Conference when we started talking about bringing development and operations together and forming a single accountable team. So this is the 3 sort of main principles of DevOps. Fast flow. Remember that technology value stream I just mentioned, from thinking an idea and going through development, through test to production? We're trying to maximize flow. How do you do that? You remove queues, right? You make small 2 pizza-sized teams. Teams that could, 2 pizza-sized. You could feed them with two pizzas. You're making things visible in terms of, we all work in an invisible world in many ways, right? We're IT. It's not like a manufacturing line where you have cars that aren't being built correctly or we're missing parts. We need to make things visible, and that's through Kanban boards and et cetera. So we're trying to maximize flow. At the same time, though, the flow of information I talked about before, we need feedback loops all the time, and scrumming to fix problems. Specifically, if a queue builds somewhere in the technology value stream, that's more than three projects or 3 workflows, you need to look at feedback loops. We have built over the years, and I think you'll attest to that, hard-coded systems. Systems that not one person understands from beginning to end. We all contribute value along the way, and it's really hard to predict if we make a change to those systems, what's going to happen at the end. So we need constantly feedback loops to learn from that. And then the last one is constant learning and experimentation. We're thinking about how do we learn on a daily basis. Part of the daily work is learning, doing a retrospective to improve things and sharing that globally. And so to give you an example of the technology value stream, right, from development through test, through production, we typically, to maximize flow, we're reducing what we call batch size in technology terms, the amount of code that you're pushing through the value stream. You're going from really big code base. No, you don't want that. You want small iterations. TELUS Digital runs maybe just changing fonts through the technology value stream all the time to see the impact. So we're not doing big amounts of code going through the value stream. We're iterating with really small pieces. We're talking about user stories, things that are written in English and described in English, the journey that the consumer of the service is going through. And we build out Kanban boards to understand, make visible the work within the technology value stream so we can identify where there's issues within the flow. And it was too quick on the clicker. And so these user stories get pushed through the technology value stream, and ideally, if you do this right, you're looking at a container. And containers are immutable objects, right? They're binary objects that you can force through, and very predictable in terms of moving them. That's why we built containers in the first place. We can predictably move software through the technology value stream. We introduced things called CI/CD pipelines. How many people know what this is? You can think of this like when Henry Ford invented the assembly line. CI/CD pipelines are very similar to that. And that's why the BC Dev Exchange can move so fast, because we have an automated pipeline to do that. It's like comparing before Henry Ford invented the assembly line. If he was to ask people, what would you want out of your car? They'd say, well, we want more horses, right? They didn't think they could afford cars. They didn't think there was a better way of doing things. And the CI/CD pipeline is a way of automating that. Automated code scanning, testing, automated testing, as I said, and then you're building a minimal viable product that's user-focused. You are extremely user-focused on the team and building that out. And as I said, the term microservices or distributed architecture, cloud-native architectures are quite used, so we're breaking up the applications into smaller bits. When we asked all our customers, our biggest customers around the world, what's the one thing that we could do to help them, they said, you need to show us how to innovate the way you do it at Red Hat through the open source way. And we built out the Open Innovation Labs, very focused on building high-trust cultures. If you're going to look at working in the open, if you are thinking about a high-performance team and you're building applications where there's uncertainty in the outcome, you have to build trust among team members. And so we have a lot of psychological aspects to how we do these residencies with you. We basically pair up 2 of our developers or to your developers, and we go through and build a minimal viable product based on what you already saw on the previous slide. But more importantly, we're figuring out social contracts, and we're trying to figure out how do people put them in a workspace where it drives innovation, it drives inspiration. A lot of sticky notes, a lot of discussions around what are we actually doing so everybody's on the same page. And so we built out the Open Innovation Labs to do that. And it's very similar to the structure within the BC Dev Exchange here. One thing I will point out is a really fast rising approach to doing strategic planning. It's a thing called impact mapping. It came out in 2012 by Gojko Adzik, I always mispronounce his name. This is a way to look at strategic planning and understand in a visual mind map kind of way, what you're trying to build at the beginning of a project, but also as an operational tool to make sure that the outcomes you are getting are aligned to the original goal of the project. This is just a simple example, but you see the goal, you see the actors. The actors are the people, the primary actors are the people consuming your service. The secondary actors are the ones adding value to that value stream or to the service. And then there's the third parties who are interested, in stakeholders. These are the people. How are we changing their behaviors? That's the impact in this slide. Impact, how are you changing their behavior? How are they doing their daily job? How are people consuming your service? And the deliverable are the things, the features that you're delivering to them. And so you can start to see that there's assumptions and things embedded in this diagram to help you understand as you go through the building process, are we getting the impacts we need to meet the goals of that? Are the actors behaving the right way? And so this is part of that iterative approach to how we innovate. The Open Innovation Labs, we just don't open source our technology, we open source our Open Innovation Labs. You can literally go to the openpracticelibrary.com that you see here and download all our practices and how we deliver these things. And it's an open source project, so you're welcome to contribute to them as well. And so there's a series of about 25, 30 practices around that. Focusing on technology, and based on some time, I will move really quickly. When we look at architecture, I've talked about distributed applications. We look at the platform to help with that spread across the hybrid cloud. A singular platform of doing that, so you minimize TCO, you minimize duplication of skills, talent, process, and you should take a single approach to do that. And microservices architecture, as I said, is the breakdown of the big monolithic apps that you see on the left-hand side of the slide to microservices or services. And this is an excellent way to take your legacy applications and take pieces off it. We call it strangle the monolith in our world. Cuddle the monolith is probably a better idea, but think about your monolithic applications and you want to move faster and break them up. You can do one service at a time. And so the value is, as I said, you can make change very quickly, you can automate the delivery, and you can take fine-grained scalability. You can scale different parts of the application architecture based on need and not scale the entire thing. And this platform should also be polyglot. Multiple languages and frameworks are now becoming use case specific. And so you need to have a platform to support that. And so what we're in it was the distributed architecture, which does introduce complexity, right? Developers now start to need to think about what happens if the application goes down? What if there's no network communication between these services? How do you handle that? The good news is that there is a microservice nirvana. There's this thing called service meshes that will handle a lot of those interruptions to network availability. It'll handle flow control, and that's embedded in the platform. The developer doesn't have to think about that. They can just scale up their applications based on load, either in an automated fashion or through pushing a button. And the service mesh architecture will help with that. This actually came out of Lyft, the car equivalent to Uber. This actual technology came out of that and is now embedded in a lot of the platforms that reside in public clouds as well as other platforms. Istio is the kind of the sidecar pattern that we see where the actual applications communicate through each other through one of these sidecars, and it handles things such as advanced deployment testing like I talked about before. Okay, automation. Teams are automating, and we believe that the automation strategy should not be like this. You shouldn't have islands of automation depending on the type of IT asset. You should have one approach to automation, one language. Everything should be automated in terms of written in recipes, not manually done. So automation should be, automated silos are still silos. So one approach to doing that, whether the application is on-prem or in the public cloud, or whether it's an application versus a piece of physical asset. One approach to doing everything. That builds high-trust culture teams. It should be simple. It should be the language to automate. It should be powerful. It should be able to handle all use cases, and agentless, so you don't increase your threat vectors to your infrastructure. And this is the way that we look at automation. An individual basis, then approach the team, the group, and then we look across the entire enterprise. We want to have that car experience where it's completely automated. You don't need a steering wheel in the car. Everything should take care of itself. Governance is a big topic, and I've had many discussions on what governance means. How many people here from enterprise architecture or handle governance and policy? A few people? Yeah, I'm starting to rethink this too. This is going to be a flexible approach to doing EA and governance as well. In my opinion is we got to think about within the platforms themselves, put in controls and guardrails to protect the developers and the users against themselves in many ways, but also not define hard standards, but provide principles around how you should innovate within the organization. And I will tell you, integration is still a major issue with organizations. How do you approach integration? The integration layer? Same way you approach application architecture. This is a distributed application integration layer. We believe in these three principles: distributed integration, containers, and an API-first approach. Not only to how applications talk to themselves, within themselves, but external to the organization, as well as within the platform itself. Government of Canada runs on our 3-scale platform for their entire API store, and I know you're looking at that within the province of BC. So to quickly finish up, I think to accumulate what I've talked about, working in the open, the advantages of working in the open, government as a platform, this is a great book to read. I think Tim O'Reilly from the O'Reilly series of books coined the term government as a platform. This idea of building government and allowing the marketplace to build applications in conjunction with the govies is the next approach to how we're seeing government evolve. And kind of seeing bits and pieces of that today in the BC Dev Exchange, where where it's allowed, the applications that are being built, the actual source code is being put into open source repositories so that it can be shared across ministries and it can be shared across jurisdictions. And some of the provinces have actually been picking up some of your code. So the idea is you have a platform at the bottom of this diagram that may be singular, but across the hybrid cloud. You have integration and API management in this marketplace who will build digital services with the government of BC together in the future to deliver services to the citizens. So in conclusion, accelerated value really requires an agile and iterative approach to building minimal viable products using an agile organization. A core singular platform is a key aspect of how you do that. Automation is king, and container technology, because of its ability to predictably move applications and software through all the environments, is the way to go. And I think we share the slides, if I'm not mistaken, after the conference. But if you'd like, reach out to me directly. My email's there, and my LinkedIn's there, and my Twitter. And with that, I'm finished. Good. Maybe one question? No question? You can see me in the hall, but thank you.